lives here. She brought in, and I almost purchased too. I think it was a lottery for Langston Hughes. Those apartments on 1-4. I think in Harlem it's 145.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Right on the corner.
Malcolm X?
Yes, I was living in Queenston, Long Island City. And I was working in the Bronx. So I remember going over, I think it's the 145th Street Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Nate in the Bronx is
Reverend Breyer, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you for having us over.
Hi, how are you? Good, thank you.
Oh, it's a different look when it's empty.
Before you sit down, more spacious.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's keep this all
Much
together.
more spacious.
Yeah.
Hadn't realized she was moving in to a new home tomorrow.
Now, so I don't steam up my
Hold
glasses
on,
the whole time. I'm gonna
out of the apartment?
keep this just sort of a little low.
Could I tuck this
I've been
right into your
renovating
pocket
You
since
sure
August.
can.
All right.
I think I knew
I'm just
that.
going to put it back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did know that.
It's gonna fog up.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Very well, actually.
That's good.
Doing well uptown. Enjoying the park with the snow.
I'm good, thank you.
Really?
Skiing.
Central Park.
Yes, exactly.
You're ready?
Oh, gosh.
Just to let you know, when we get to the point of there being about 10 minutes left, the conversation's only about an hour. I'll stand up and I'll do this. That means you have about 10 minutes. Usually the PC's the one that's easy, but so that you know, I'm not stopping anything.
Okay.
5 minutes, 3, 2, or so. You may not be able to see each other.
Right.
All right?
And this time you're gonna lead.
I'm gonna leave.
You're gonna lead and
Oh, lead. I'm leading.
direct.
Okay.
Or,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying not to fog up my glasses.
When I give the thumbs up, then you guys can start talking.
Okay.
So I'm going to go left now.
It's Commissioner Holmes?
Chief Holmes. Chief Holmes.
Chief Holmes.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
Live.
Deputy? Okay.
We're good. Reverend Bernard, we're on. Yep.
We're on. Okay. So, welcome. I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard and joined by an esteemed panel of individuals along with our police commissioner. We have Reverend Chloe Breyer, who's with us. We have Chief Holmes, who's with us. And we're having a conversation, a most necessary conversation right here at Christian Cultural Center, which I think is great. The fact that we're doing it in the community itself. And the 7-5, unfortunately, one of those communities that have to deal with some of those numbers, some of those statistics that we face. In conversation with Deputy Commissioner Chauncey Parker, we were talking about how to frame this kind of conversation today, and he brought up Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last book called Where Do We Go From Here? And I thought about that in that Dr. King took that book and really framed a conversation by asking 3 questions. Number 1, who are we? Number 2, how did we get here? Number 3, where do we go from here? And I think that's so appropriate for this kind of a conversation because who are we in this context speaks of the police, an institution that has a mission to protect and serve, and has a history, however, with the black community that has to be explored. And the black community, a community that has a very complex and unique social experience in America. How do we get here? Looking back at history and context, and the fact that policing began with an antagonistic relationship with the black community. And where do we go from here? How do we, think of ideas, innovative ways of building relationship and strengthening that mission to protect and serve, and a vision of working together as a community. So, a little bit of an introduction to frame the conversation. I think we begin with who are we? And we have to look at the police. Who are the police in terms of their role in the community?
Well, Reverend Bernard, thank you. And for that opening, as I'm listening to you speak, you mentioned protect and serve, and that's right what came to my mind as well. It's in our mission statement, right, Juanita?
Yes, it is.
But what also went through my mind as I'm listening to you is that depending on who you ask, you're probably going to get different answers to that question. And what I kind of pull away from it is we are at a time right now when it's more important than ever. I think we know what we think and what we feel and what we're going to say. Of course, our mission as the police is to protect the communities and to serve them and to keep them safe and to fight crime and improve people's quality of life. But I think that more important than that is, as we have these hard conversations, understanding that others have different opinions and understanding that what you think and feel, and doesn't everyone know that and think as I do, is not the case. And I think that when we start hearing and listening and understanding the great diversity of opinion, and some people have very different and strong opinions, we get closer to where we need to be in terms of finding solutions and moving forward, which is another of the questions.
Yeah, I think about the stakeholder. I've been in ministry here for 42 years in New York City. Worked with several commissioners, several mayors, and
I'm the best, though.
Precinct. Thou sayest, like they say in Scripture. And it has been a challenge because times change, issues change, but people are the same. Human nature remains the same. No matter what changes,
That's right.
Human nature remains the same. And that's essentially what we're talking about. Human nature's reaction to social issues, to realities of poverty, of crime, of inequities within the society, and changes in government, administrations, and how they address things. I think that's all part of it. How long have you been on the force, Chief?
33 years.
33 years. So you've also seen.
I've seen it. I've, I lived in the city. I'm born here in Brooklyn. I attend your church. You know
I think
that, but I do.
need to project.
But with that, what I've seen a lot here. I've seen a lot of change, culminating with the position that I hold now, Chief of Patrol, which gives me the privilege and honor to pretty much push the message of the agency out to the men and women that are out here answering the jobs for us, the boots on the ground. So with that, I know when the commissioner blessed me with this position, I think it might have been 2 weeks in, that I put out some operational strategies and 5 essential pillars, 4 consisting of community engagement, reimagining community engagement, reimagining neighborhood policing, and just building off of that. And I think that the message is out there. It's something the agency, the commission, and I both continue to push, as well as customer service. Because we can think we're doing the right thing, and people are still not satisfied. And it should be people, everyone in every community, right? And we know that we have some, injustices that we've been met with in different communities, and communities of color, to be quite frank. So with that, that's essentially, not that I'm taking my eye off the ball with any other community, but that's where my focus is as far as building faith and trust in those communities that we serve.
Does it affect you differently being a person of color, part of the police force, and when issues happen within communities of color, happens to be a white police officer, a young black man, and let's say there's a shooting or some crisis that we've had to deal with. How does it affect you as a person of color on the police force?
So it affects me. I remember being assigned to Brooklyn, not too far from here. I was assigned to Public Service Area 2, and I remember being asked a question, and it bothered me. It almost like, did I get used to the violence, for lack of a better term? Because back then in 2008, there was a lot of violence here. And it's something I said you never get used to. And it bothered me every time I responded to a scene of a shooting, and it's a person of color, or it's a robbery and it's a person of color. Naturally, it bothers me. And, but it also, it resonated with me where, what can we do, what can you do differently? And as far as the members of the service, like the commissioner said, I can only control back then what I controlled, which was my particular area of policing. And my message was just my message. Here's how you're going to treat the community. Here's how we should treat the community. And this is what we're here to do. So it does affect you. You know, my family's here. I'm born in Brooklyn. My family in all parts of Brooklyn. So obviously it's going to affect me. But I also realized that, you know, you have to teach the right message. You know, police officers are impressionable. And I've met a lot of them, black, white, or indifferent, that will do whatever you ask of them and just ask to be led in the right direction, doing the right thing. They want to learn. And I like to think in some respect in my other positions that I accomplished a lot of that. And now in this position where I have 22,000, if not more, men and women working for me that are all assigned to the Patrol Service Bureau, which in respects means they're the ones responding to the 911 calls. They're the ones there for the calls for help. You know, they're the first responders. And so my message has to be strong and clear all the way down through, you know, several different layers of executives and supervisors that we have in place.
Yeah.
And it's important.
Reverend Breyer, if I can turn to you, because you and I have known each other for many years, worked together on so many different issues, and you have your feet on the ground. I mean, your passion for the community, and you have your finger on the pulse of things. How do you respond to, you know, this kind of conversation, most necessary conversation, because of the real tensions that exist that need to be dealt with?
Well, I just was thinking of your, you know, the who are we, which is it's a very simple question and yet a difficult one. And just to respond to that from my work at the Interfaith Center of New York, you know, where since '97 we've been working with very grassroots, diverse faith communities across New York. And I guess I go back to the early days of under, you know, Giuliani and the Commissioner Kelly when 9/11 had just happened, and there was an enormous kind of backlash where a lot of our civil liberties, you know, there was such a horrific incident, and the way that, you know, we felt it as a diverse community was the impact it had on that policing had on many of our Muslim faith, people of Muslim faith who shared, you know, who used the same language and who prayed in the same way as those people who flew, you know, planes into the buildings. But that was where the similarity ended. And I think that in the early days of profiling, the people who bore the brunt of that, of a kind of, you know, I think of almost more of a scared sort of policing, like we can't get to understand the community because maybe we'll be taken in by it or something will happen and we'll be surprised. So there was a sort of I felt, you know, hearing from our diverse Muslim brothers and sisters that they were being overly profiled and made to feel like they weren't part of the community, that they were not trusted by the police. And I think it was a missed opportunity for our whole city, because they were often the very people who were the most eager to, you know, have their children brought up in safety and to contribute to the city. And I don't think at the time that the leadership at the NYPD was really taking advantage of that. Quite the opposite, they were alienating many of them. So I think a lot has changed since then, since our democratic process in the city took hold of this issue. You found people working in allyship, and by 2013, when there had been a lot of lawsuits, right, about, you know, Floyd and the whole question of profiling and whether it was actually serving the purpose of protecting and serving, came up for questioning, and the legal branches got involved. And then we were part of a community group that really sought to advise the facilitator in Floyd, like what would be a way to remedy this situation, to rebuild the trust. And so the changes that we've seen this past year that have been substantial, I think really began back in 2015, if maybe I'm wrong about that, but that was when the body cameras and the, you know, outreach to, you know, lots and lots of groups.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Many things.
Yeah. And so it seems like this, you know, it's been on a trajectory for quite some time. If I'm not, I mean, I don't know if I'm correct about that, but that's my impression.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of things that are coming if you're thinking, you're speaking of positive things. or
Yes, yes, yes,
change, right,
yes,
that
yes,
are
yeah.
coming to light now that have certainly been in the works and started years before. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
You know, Commissioner, I think about, who are we, the stakeholders, the police, the community, and, I specifically spoke about the black community, but they're not alone in terms of feeling targeted. I was in a meeting with Orthodox Jews, Latinos, African Americans, Muslims, and each representative said that they were targeted by the police. So it's interesting how we may think it's one community, but every community is feeling in some way from time to time targeted. But I thought about moving forward, and I don't want to jump over, but it's necessary to talk about that second question, how do we get here? Because moving forward, it's going to take humility, it's going to take empathy, it's going to take a spirit of collaboration, it's going to take moral courage. How important is context? Because when we think about empathy, it's not something that can be taught. It's something that's facilitated by conscience because you've been exposed to a history and a context that a person or an organization is in. How much does the police department do to help in the training of police officers understand the history and the context of police relationships, especially with specific communities?
That's a great point. I think historically, not nearly enough. One of the appointments I made this year, Reverend, is Chief Kenny Corey is now the overseer of our training bureau. And under the training bureau is all the training that Juanita's cops receive every day. It's also he's also in charge of the police academy. I mean, that's the flagship for us, where we have recruits in the academy now, and we recognize that's the foundation, but it can't end then, and it has to continue on throughout their career. Historically, we did not teach that. I could tell you that there has been a lot of thought, ever increasing, on the importance of teaching the history of a particular neighborhood, a particular bad incident that occurred in the neighborhood, possibly dealing with the police, maybe not. But we feel now that it's very important that we give such a strong foundation to the young police officers that are coming and being put into a community, that they have a connection to that community. Some grew up in the city. We can give you the numbers, but they're just numbers. But where we recruit from and how diverse we are and how many lived in the city, but ultimately that doesn't necessarily mean you have a connection, and we think that we can do better there. So we have members of the community coming in to teach our recruits and let them hear right from them on a variety of things that we do that. So we have representatives from our own fraternal organizations speak to the recruits in the academy and teach them, for example, about LGBTQ issues, about, you're getting assigned in Brooklyn South, well, let's learn about the West Indian community before you're immersed in it, and you may have not a real connection. But I think that is being done more and more, and it's critical. If you're assigned to the 6th precinct in the village, do you have an awareness about what happened at the Stonewall Inn? So these types of incidents we are doing more and more. We think it's very important, and you need to know your history to learn from it. Yeah. And you need to learn your history so you don't repeat some of the same mistakes. And I don't think it's a guarantee that that's going to happen. We teach you this, and now therefore you behave a certain way. But I think it increases the likelihood that we're giving you a strong foundation, and I would certainly rather do it than not. So we're committed to that. I probably missed a few things there, Juanita.
No,
if
you
can
have,
think of
and
anything.
you'd be surprised at how many people in the community want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
You get people that call up all the time. People, when I was in Chief of Domestic Violence, from a lot of the advocacy groups that want to be a part of the training for domestic violence, but especially from the community. And you're absolutely right, Reverend Bryant. 2015, I think we formalized the position of community partners. And that was done where they would not only come into the academy and speak with the young people coming out of the academy, but once they got out of the academy, they were there to welcome them into the neighborhood, introduce them to the clergy, introduce them to other business partners, and maybe we got away from that. And I think we have gotten away from that. And then being met with COVID complicated things. So now that's something that's at the forefront and that we're really, really drilling down on. Like the commissioner said, Chief Kenny Core is very much committed to that. And it's important, but I think the key thing is, contrary to all that we've been going through in particular neighborhoods, you still have people from the community that want to help and are committed to helping the police and to training a lot of the officers that we formerly hired and that are new coming onto the job.
I think that's important what you just said, because on the ground, communities of color and communities that feel targeted, they want police presence. It's not like they don't want the police there. They want order. They want to feel safe in their communities, but at the same time, they're concerned about the type of policing that will be applied to that community, especially in the black community when it comes to young black boys. You know, how are they going to be policed? Will they be policed by the same standard in some other community where the stigmas are not associated as with communities of color? Understanding is a two-way street. So it's one side to get the law enforcement officers to understand the context and history of the communities that they're going to protect and serve. It's another thing to get the community to understand the police side of things, because I went through training to understand it in the police department and with the FBI. And, you know, too often we're thinking about the community and people being looked at as human beings, but law enforcement officers, they're human beings as well. What do you do to help the community understand your side of it?
Well, I think it begins and ends with the collaboration and the engagement. We have community affairs officers. We have many programs such as, you know, depending on the age, you know, at a young age, we try to get our hooks into, if you will, some of the young kids and get them involved in programs in the NYPD. But in terms of specifically what you're mentioning, you know, we have precinct community councils in every command. We have a Citizens Police Academy that we sponsor. It's put off again this year with COVID, but where we pull in community members, it could be members that live in the community. Sometimes it's people, we would almost rather people that, I hate to say a negative feeling, but a negative feeling about the police. And that's who we would rather get engaged with here to try to show them, as you said, here is why we do certain things. Here's the laws. Here's how we teach. Do you have recommendations? But also to just foster a better understanding. We've run that program for years. I would say it's very successful. But it's those types of things, I would argue, that we need to do more of. Pulling people into our police academy. We have a lot of critics. And sometimes it's deserved, and sometimes I would argue that it's not. Whether it's people that you know, see an incident on the street or attend a community meeting. Maybe it's somebody that's proposing a new law. We want to engage with them all because we think it's important. And before a law is passed, and now we have to deal with the ramifications of it, come into the police academy and talk to the instructors and talk to the recruits and see what we are trying to do. Be a part of that change. I find myself saying that more and more these days. But I think that is critical, because ultimately when you look at New York City, we all want the same thing. We want peace and quiet. We want public safety. We want fairness. We want our kids to be able to grow up and thrive and get jobs and have successful lives. So when we start from a mindset of how do we engage together, people of multiple faiths, people of multiple ethnicities, people of all sexual orientations across. This is New York City. It's our beautiful city. The more we engage with that line of thinking, I think, and having these conversations, the better. But it is, I think it's more important than ever, because we certainly have challenges right now.
Hopefully, we're going to get and see more relief from COVID, and things get back to, I won't say normal.
I was hoping you had a direct line here.
I don't know. I think if my line was a little better, I would have known before COVID came so I could have warned people. But, you know, it just didn't work out that way. But, you know, some are saying April, July, August, you know, there's all of this. But one reality is that crime has gone up. We coming out of COVID, well, coming out of, still somewhat in it, but George Floyd, the protests, all of that. And at some point in time, things will go back to normal in terms of the ability to police communities, the ability to effect change. What's your response to the high crime? I mean, you know, we had stop and frisk, which was a very controversial issue. For me, not in terms of the stop and frisk as a tool, but how it was applied was my problem with it. All right, where do you see, when we talk about where do we go from here? Because we can have kumbaya moments and conversations, but you still have the police. You still have to deal with crime and the issues for why you exist. What are your thoughts going forward, considering the need to build relationships at the same time, do your job with issues of crime?
Yeah, I mean, Lord, I could spend hours. This is my, you know, one of my many passions. But when you look at where we were, one of the frustrating things to me is that I think that we had done, coming out of, you know, 2013, and you mentioned, Reverend, the Floyd decision. We had pivoted. Policing is constantly evolving. So when you say a static point in time, there is no static for us. It may appear that way, but we're always trying to change. And I'm very proud of how we had driven crime down the last few years and driven incarceration, summonses, stops. Some of it was because we had to. Much of it was because of policies we put in place. The truth is, the fact that we had gotten to a good place is what's important to me. That changed pretty significantly over the last year. Even we had started to see crime go up before COVID. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We have challenges right now. We've spoken about the perfect storm. There's a lot of different issues here. I think it makes it more important than ever that we're all rowing in the same direction. You said it, we have to keep crime down. We have to keep people safe. We also have to do it in a manner that doesn't alienate communities. And that's really not easy. I'm going to be honest with you. It's why communication and working together is so important. The gun violence right now, I'll be quiet and let Juanita talk. The gun violence has to be the priority, but there's a lot of issues. I was on a call today with BIDs, business improvement districts all over Manhattan. A lot of concerns about some of the lower level crimes and people coming back to work, their employees and tourists and things of that nature. So I think that we need to be at this table. We need to be at this table, but we also need to get legislators at this table. We need prosecutors at this table, and that's what we get paid for. Well, we get paid for it. We need to figure this out and come to that right balance where we can keep people safe. We can do it without over-incarcerating people. We can do it while giving people second chances, but not chaos. And that may sound strong, but I think that that's accurate. That's what I believe after 30 years, 33. We have 60-something years of experience between us. Policing is about balance, and you can't do it without the community. You need the community involved. You also need the prosecutors and legislators all having this conversation together. Because if you miss one piece, it tilts.
Right.
That's the spirit of collaboration that we're talking about.
Can I just say, I think that's interesting the way you put it, because it does seem like the police has everybody's attention right now.
Always.
You've got the governor, you've got the mayor. I mean, right now at this moment as we sit here, they're vying plans, it seems, that are in the works, right? Are we about to have a 30-day comment period on the mayor? We've got, you know, the
reform
initiatives. I mean, all these things are in place, which I think, I don't know how that feels to you, but from an outsider's perspective, it is good to see both the training and accountability go hand in hand. Because often, and this is what I sort of felt in the earlier days of reform, is how much easier it was to, in some ways, do training than it was to, I mean, on that agreement with the CCRB, I have to congratulate you on, because I know it must be very difficult to, in some ways, people are asking you to give up power. And it's always difficult to give up power, particularly if your mandate is to keep people safe, and that involves using force. So nonetheless, I guess I am, as a citizen, glad to see, and a religious leader, glad to see that there has been a degree of accountability, sort of more so, more accountability for people who are in the force who behave badly. And that perhaps the discipline process is itself, it may be difficult as commissioner to have to change that around, or in some ways have less responsibility for it, or whatever it is that's going on that you had to agree to with this decision with the CCRB. Nonetheless, from an outsider, it gives me faith that the overall picture may be working together for the good. And maybe it's just because I'm so far outside and I don't see it, what's going on. But I actually find it reassuring as a citizen that the police isn't sort of off there by itself, making its own rules and being oblique. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with really anything that you said. Ultimately, I need to be, everyone needs accountability, including myself. And if you have, we hear this all the time. It's why we got into a lot of trouble at times with not being as judicious and not holding people accountable as much as we should have. I could tell you, I don't know if Juanita, if you were there, but back in May or June, we held an internal meeting with members of the NYPD at very high ranks. And somebody, I remember who said it, but they said, they basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, we got ourselves into this problem because we don't treat these cases serious enough when we see them. And that's what the public sees. Sometimes I hear things and read things, in the paper that I would disagree with, but I don't think this is really the place for it. And the spirit of it is, I think we've done a lousy job on telling the people how we hold people accountable, not doing it enough. I think all those reforms that you said that, we worked on, I think it's going to make market improvements. And I think, back to my earlier statement, evolution, where it's not done. We're not in a static place. We need to train people. You're right. That can't be an excuse for not discipline. Where it's appropriate, then training. Where people need to be held accountable, they need to be held accountable. And if I'm not doing that, then I should be fired. I'll be the first to say that. People need to have faith that when people do things wrong in any profession, but certainly in this profession, that there's accountability. And that's what I think, Reverend, this is where we've failed miserably. You don't hear the stories of the people that are fired. The 50A thing is going to correct that once it's ultimately finally lifted. I can tell you that we have systems in place and electronic dashboards in place to basically ready to push play, and that will increase the transparency and people will have more of a window into what happens. But the discipline matrix was, and as you said, a lot of these things were being worked on for years. They weren't, there was a legislation passed at the city council, but it was years ago that I got to give Jimmy O'Neill and Ben Tucker credit. They reached outside the department for that blue ribbon panel, which came back and said, you know what, you have a pretty good discipline procedure in the NYPD, but you're terrible at telling people what you do. And some of the recommendations did still come, and one of them was that matrix. And I think that's a win for the police. It's a win for myself in meting out discipline. And it's a win for the CCRB so that we have consistency. And everyone understands this is the rules. And this is the expected penalties, and this is your code of conduct, if you will. So I could go on with that, but
I think it's important because you and I have had conversations about messaging and the deficiency. Because I'll hear about all of these incredible things that the police department is doing, that you're doing, but nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
And so, what are you doing as part of where do we go from here? Messaging to the public all the things that you are doing to make changes, substantial changes, but the public doesn't know about it.
Yeah, I think the CCRB one, there was an article in the paper recently, and if we went into some of the CCRB statistics, it shocks people that the majority of officers that don't have complaints and substantiated complaints. And if you read that article, you'd say, what is the police department doing? They never agree with CCRB. Boring stories don't sell. and if I had the opportunity to sit down and say, well, yes, there was, you know, I think the number was 71% of the time there's not agreement.
Right, 71%.
But there's cases that when the officer says, I'm going to fight this, and it goes to a trial with believe me, it's a real judge and it's a real proceeding. And when the judge rules something, if that's different, that's now what we go with. That counts as a difference. So there are explanations for the vast majority of that. But when people read, hey, 70% of the time you're disregarding the CCRB, there is no way we would want that to happen, and that's just not really the whole story.
Right. That's a misconception. So what they see is it's a misconception that there was no discipline. When it's like the commissioner said, it was discipline, but people go to trial. They have a fair trial. It may be ruled, okay, what they recommended is not the appropriate recommendation. That, you know, the judge may recommend something different as far as this one, and it may be harsher than what CCRB recommended, but still it's going to show as a percentage of the time that we disagreed with their outcomes. And I think that's, you know, it's like you said, we don't do a great job in marketing. I often tell the officers there's a difference between posting something and marketing yourself. We don't market ourselves very well. And I've had several meetings, and I might have mentioned it with Daughters for Justice or Chauncey, where I said, we fire people, but it's not a case that's related to Sean Bell or a case related to the Staten Island incident, what happened. So Eric Gartner. So as a result of such, nobody hears about it because it's not newsworthy. But there are people, civilians and uniformed members of the service, that are fired, or either they opt to resign prior because they know they're going to be terminated. But it is discipline. But I think this is key because there's that transparency, that everyone's going to be able to see straight across the board. This is what happened. This is what was done as a result of it. So
I think it's important for people to understand, when we talk about history and context, where we go from here, that cultures develop over time.
Yeah.
And they become institutionalized in many, many ways, with many policies that reinforce them. So it takes time to change that culture. And I will tell you, just from the implementation of CPR, you know, under Schaefer, I was working with him, to now, there's been significant changes, really. I've seen it. But again, you don't hear about it, you know, and it's difficult to believe that things are changing if you don't hear of those changes. So the messaging is so important. How many conversations like this have taken place, and do you plan to do?
Virtually, a lot. I did one Sunday night with Staten Island minority women, you know, in business. A lot of district attorneys' office was, you know, citywide, were attended that call. I know COVID has this negative impact on us, but believe it or not, when you were speaking about the commissioner, where do we go from here? We're doing a lot now. The Citizens Police Academy was a certain age group. Now we have a youth police academy. So you have younger people attending that, getting knowledge of, you know, the police department. We have the cadet corps, we have explorers. A lot of times we don't have a lot of seats, you know, because we're limited to certain head counts. But with that, we have the neighborhood policing program. So you have build-a-block meetings. They're now being held virtually. Virtually, sometimes hybrid, if they have a location where you can spread people out and have a virtual aspect attached to it. We're reaching more people. I can't tell you the number of meetings, sit-downs that I'm doing, and I try, and anyone that asks, be accommodating because of the fact that now we're using this platform of virtual communication. And I know the police commission is pulled in 10 different directions, and Chief Madry in Community Affairs, the same thing. He reaches out to the clergy. We did a big meeting with all the bids throughout New York City. I remember I attended it with Jeff. So we are able to reach this mass amount of people now in the city simply because of the circumstances that we were met with. And now we have the ability to actually use the virtual platform and pushing that out to the community council meetings, as well as the neighborhood policing aspect.
It's interesting with us, you know, we're busier with the building closed than with the building open.
Right.
Because of technology
That's
and our
right.
ability to extend
You're
ourselves.
starting to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you found that there is more cooperation with your attempts to build relationships and build partnerships?
I would say yes. I see Juanita
A
nodding.
big yes.
I
Big,
think
big
that
yes.
I think there's no question.
Big yes.
I find an abundance of people that want to get involved. If there's something good that came from last year, maybe this is it. One of a few things that, whether you talk about, you know, the murder of George Floyd or the discussion about race and policing, and really it's a bigger discussion, I would argue. But out of all of that, you have people that just want to get involved and do things. And the trick I find, and the hard part, is corralling them and then answering the question when they say, what do you want me to do? Right? We may have had this conversation where you turn to me, what can I do? And I don't always have the answer. But that's, I find overwhelmingly people are supportive, want to help. They want to help for a lot of different reasons. They want to help for New York City, for themselves, because they just don't like what they see happening at times, for all the right reasons. So it's you know, how do we turn that momentum and not lose it, and turn it from a Zoom conference when you click off and now you're on to the next one, to actually getting tangible results. That is the trick that we are working on. I do have faith in New Yorkers, I'll tell you, Reverend. And Juanita mentioned a lot of the things going on, whether it's you know, in-person meetings or the work of our youth officers or neighborhood policing officers,
Recruitment.
the community affairs officers, the recruitment
Yes.
drive that's coming up with the test in
It's,
June.
I did a Instagram Thursday with the recruitment unit, and I pushed it out to every precinct. Pushed. I mean, even Nassau County, I had teachers from Westbury with groups of kids, you know, on that particular Instagram. And I'm technically challenged a little bit. I was I was on a furlough day operating from home, trying to get it up front, and I could see the kids saying, "Where's the chief? Where's the chief?" Because she's supposed to. So 15 minutes later, I end up being on the Instagram. You know, it's live, and I tell you the amount of people that it tells you how people still want to be part of the police department. Young people, they want to. The communities want to be. They want to be treated with humanity. They want to be respected, and they want to be treated fairly, and that's not a you know, huge ask, right? It's what we do and what we should do. It's the right thing to do. So, but with that, you still had a lot of young people that are interested in, with all we went through this summer, with all that the city went through, the community went through, still willing to join the police department.
Well, you know what worked so well was that September weekend. I think the end of the weekend, last week in September, it was like Black and Blue Day or something. I can't remember. Chief Madry announced it about 24 hours before it happened.
Right, right.
But it was
Oh, yes.
perfect because we got our, you know, I'm
That
up
was
at
across
St.
the country.
Yes.
Philip's. Yeah, and
The
it
national
was like the
night out
reason.
thing.
It was like bring your daughter to work day or
Right.
something. I got to like just pick up the phone, ask the, you know, head of the 35th or the 38th. We're right across the street in Harlem. And I'd never met him before.
Right.
And he came on our Zoom call, and it was fascinating. He got
Yes.
told us about dirt bikes and, you know, trafficking and like all these things, and everyone was just fascinated.
Yes.
And the whole congregation was texting, you know, the like in the chat, all the questions. What can we do? It was just so great. It was
Yes.
so simple. And if they could do that like every year, you know, this is the weekend that we invite our local precinct to coffee hour.
Right.
You know,
People,
I mean,
right.
like that was
Yeah.
just
They-
so simple and great.
They love it. Years ago, we used to do where we invited them in. I remember we did that under Commissioner Kelly, because I did it in the 81st precinct when I was in Bed-Stuy.
Clergy, you're saying.
The community.
Community.
Yeah. Oh.
So each office was represented on a weekday, and the kids would come in, and people in the community that never meet the police or never walk into a precinct. But they learned about domestic violence, about community affairs. They looked at the detective squad, and we had coffee and little bagels there for them. And I remember it was great. And that was years ago. And people came. A lot of people came. So.
You know, it's my hopes that this conversation will be viewed by not just supporters, but detractors, skeptics. If that, my wish happens, what do you say? You don't have to win those who already support you. But what do you say to the detractors? What do you say to the skeptics with regard to the future of police and community relationships and policing in New York City?
I think step one is getting us together to the table. And without that happening, I think it kind of falls apart. As I'm listening to Reverend Chloe, I'm thinking congregations, it's a marriage made in heaven. Like, why are we not doing more with your services and police and every service, not waiting for a Zoom conference? And whether it's officers attending services or maybe being there outside, it's just, there's so much potential to bring us together, all who are really working for the same thing. And so that we see each other in a different light and don't see each other at times of crisis and bad things happening, terrible things sometimes happening, that we see each other for who we are, just normal people going about their work. To your question again, I think we have to, that's definitely who we need to have conversations with. And it's got to be honest conversations, and we have to address, you know, whatever those elephants in the room are, the CCRBs. It's not all rosy. Like, why do you have this particular person working in a community with 10 civilian complaints? You know, they know exactly who that person is. What are you doing about it? Why? What policy? So let's have those hard conversations. But it's got to be started, and it's got to be something that is ongoing. And as I listen to Reverend Bernard, you and Juanita talking there, you know, I find myself sometimes talking about all the things we're doing. Juanita's heard me say this. What we need to do is push it down so that it's not the commissioner or the chief level talking about what we're doing. It's got to be felt at the ground,
the grassroots,
where the police officers are out there every day. And I think they're the best people in the world. I'm guilty as charged. I'm biased. You know, you talked about, and I talked about pivoting. You talked about the Floyd decision. They'll do whatever they're directed to do. They will. And that comes from Juanita, and that comes from me and other people in the police department. They're not to blame for the Floyd decision. We're to blame for the Floyd decision. And pushing, whether it's, you know, stops or summonses, you know. I can be incredibly proud of how we've pivoted, but to be incredibly proud, you also have to say, yeah, we screwed up. And look at how we used to police, but look how we're evolving and doing it better. We have a lot of work to do.
You know, we could talk about context, history, where we've come from, how we got here, but the biggest thing is trust.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That's the big thing. That's the challenge. Restoring trust, trusting each other. Because if you could get that between police and the communities, things are going to change a lot faster. Yes.
I just had a thought about that. I was sitting, driving over here. I was thinking about the Pope John Paul II, who went to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel. And he went and he apologized to the victims of the survivors of the Holocaust. You know, in a purely symbolic gesture. That single gesture resonated so much, because not of anything that the Pope did, not that any living priest or person in his tradition did, but because of the groundwork that his institution, in other words, the church, had set for 1,700 years in laying the groundwork for the Holocaust. In other words, the original sin of the church being anti-Semitism, and gradually over 2,000 years enabling and giving permission, in a sense, for the Holocaust to occur. Nothing of it had to do, I just think that this is my little dream, because having known and walked with Umaba, whose son was killed on St. Nicholas Avenue after she called for an ambulance, My dream is that you or someone in your position might be able to, in a symbolic gesture of apology, serve, because there's been so much real work that's been done on reform, it wouldn't be inconsistent at this point to have a symbolic action of some kind that might go to the relatives of Eric Garner, of some of the really well-known, well-publicized people who've been shot because of the police. And I just offer that up there as a vision.
Well, I think owning something is the first step, because it says that you accept responsibility, and doesn't mean that you're responsible directly, but in the position that you hold as representative of all these law enforcement officers. I don't know what that's going to look like, how it can work out.
I think your dream came true today because the commissioner, during our award ceremony in Harlem, I think spoke quite eloquently to that and apologized to the community of New York City. I know the commissioner is being very modest right now, but yes, we were being honored for Black History Month. Some of the black executives and some of the officers that ended up when that incident happened at what's the church?
Cathedral of St. John the Divine.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yes. So we were there in Harlem for that.
Yeah.
And absolutely, that was, it was very apologetic to the community of New York City, to the community of color in New York City. And just like you said, it wasn't the commissioner necessarily personally carrying it out, or myself, but still just realizing and recognizing all that they have gone through. So
I think it's an important step, because even if people don't believe it's genuine, it doesn't matter. The fact that you do it,
that's right.
that sets it in motion. Reverend Breyer, thank you for being here today and contributing in a very significant way to this conversation. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Holmes, for all that you do and the years that you have expended your life
Thank you.
to this, because you have to have a passion.
Yes,
you're still
you
here.
do. That's right. That's
30
right.
years, you're still
That's
here.
right.
And Commissioner, thank you. It's never easy to be that face that everybody's going to look at and celebrate when you do it right in their eyes, and just attack you when they think that it's your fault. It's a tough place to be in, but that's leadership. Leadership is a foul-weather job. Nobody wants to know who's in charge until things go wrong,
That's
right?
right.
That's right.
That's the way it is. But thank you, Commissioner, for having this kind of conversation.
Thank you.
And as they continue, you are definitely in our prayers, that there will be that trust that's rebuilt to make it easier to build relationship and do your jobs.
That's
Thank you.
well said. Thank you, Reverend Bernard.
Thank you.